Hey everybody, this video is called Joash's End in Repairs, and today we continue our pass-through study here in the book of 2 Kings, looking at the 12th chapter, where we're going to be looking at the reign of Joash over Judah. So chapter 12, starting verse 1 through 3, says, "In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king, and he was reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Jehoash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. But the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places." So verses 1 through 3 here, Jehu of Israel began to reign right in 841 BC. And 40 years was between 835 and 796 BC. And so Joash, we see that his reign was mostly blessed period of time. But we see that he fell short in being fully committed in complete godliness. But he did advance the cause of God's kingdom of Judah. And when Jehoiada died, Joash no longer did right in the eyes of the Lord. And as I mentioned before many times, when you study through 2 Kings, you might as well just take 2 Chronicles right with it. Because in 2 Chronicles 24, verse 15 through 23, it says that it tells us what he did. And it tells us that he turned to idolatry and that judgment followed him. And we see that he failed to remove the high places of worship where people went against the law, seeing these sacrifices and burnt incense to the Lord, as found in Deuteronomy chapter 12. In verse 4 and 5 it says, "And Jehoash said to the priests, all the money of the dedicated gifts that are brought into the house of the Lord, each man's census money, each man's assessment money, and all the money that a man purpose in his heart to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priests take it themselves, each from his constituency, and let them repair the damages of the temple wherever any dilapidation is found." So likewise, 2 Chronicles 24 gives the same account. And the dedicated gifts, they were the holy gifts given as offerings to the priests and used to support the temple. And they were what some churches today would call the money they set apart for a building fund, because the building isn't going to be there forever. And buildings, they break down. Things break, just like having a car. And the three main offerings were the half shekel that assessed from every male 20 years old and above whenever a census was taken, as we looked at the censuses back in Exodus chapter 30, verse 11 through 16. And the payments of personal vows in Leviticus 27, and voluntary offerings, as we saw back in Leviticus chapter 27, verse 18 through 23, as well as Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 10. And during the reign of Athaliah, the temple had suffered many damages, and the temple of articles had been taken for the use in the temple of Baal. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 7, which I encourage you, if you haven't noticed, that a lot of the Chronicles today is from 2 Chronicles chapter 24. I challenge you to go check that out on your own reading. But it says that the temple was restored because it was vandalized by Athaliah and her sons. And verse 6 through 13 says, "Now it was so by the 23rd year of King Jehoash that the priests had not repaired the damages of the temple. So King Jehoash called Jehoiada the priests and the other priests, and said to them, why have you not repaired the damages of the temple? Now therefore do not take more money from your constituency, but deliver it for repairing the damages of the temple. And the priests agreed that they would neither receive more money from the people, nor repair the damages of the temple. Then Jehoiada the priest took a chest, bored a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar, and on the right side as one comes into the house of the Lord. And the priests who kept the door put all their money brought into the house of the Lord. So it was, whenever they saw that there was much money in the chest, that the king's scribe and the high priest came and put it in bags and counted the money that was found in the house of the Lord. Then they gave the money which had been apportioned into the hands of those who did the work, who had the oversight of the house of the Lord, and they paid it out to the carpenters and the builders who worked on the house of the Lord, and to masons and stone cutters, and for buying timber and hewn stone to repair the damages of the house of the Lord. And for all that was paid out to repair the temple. However, there were not made for the house of the Lord basins of silver, trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, any articles of gold or articles of silver from the money brought into the house of the Lord. So the 23rd year was 813 BC, and Judah seemed to have used this non-accession system during the reign of Athaliah and Joash, which did not count the first year of the reign, but began with the second year. And this is how we count our ages today, starting with the second year as one. For instance, if you turn 30, the first number is 0, and then 1 is the second number. And Joash was 29 years of age. And the plan of Joash did not work. The revenue was inadequate to support the priests and the Levites to pay for the temple repairs. And perhaps the priests wouldn't fund the temple repairs. Therefore, the priests no longer received the offerings from the people, nor did they fund the temple repairs from the income that they had already received. And the building project was plagued by poor administration and financial mismanagement. They could have probably used Dave Ramsey at this time period. And in verse 9, the priests who kept the door normally screened the people to keep the unclean worshipers from entering the temple, as we're going to take a look at in the end of this book in 2 Kings chapter 25 verse 18 in April, as well as Jeremiah 52 verse 24. And these priests, they took the offering from the worshipers, dropped them into the chest. And in verse 14 through 16 says, "But they gave it to the workmen, and they repaired the house of the Lord with it. Moreover, they did not require an account from the men into whose hand they delivered the money to be paid to workmen, for they dealt faithfully. The money from the trespass offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of the Lord. It belonged to the priests." And so the income from these offerings was distinct from the income mentioned back in verse 4. And so it wasn't used in the repair of the temple, but it remained the property of the priests. And the temple repairs did not deprive the priests of their income, as they received money through the other offerings. And you probably remember the many offerings we talked about back in Leviticus, like the trespass offerings and the sin offerings. In verse 17 and 18 says, "Hazael, king of Syria, went up and fought against Gath and took it. Then Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem. And Joash, king of Judah, took all the sacred things that his fathers Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Ahaziah, kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own sacred things, and all the gold found in the treasuries of the house of the Lord, and in the king's house, and sent them to Hazael, king of Syria. Then he went away from Jerusalem." So we see that Gath was one of the major 5 Philistine cities that was approximately 25 miles southwest of Jerusalem. And in 2 Chronicles 11:8, it says that Gath had previously belonged to Judah. And when Joash's army was defeated by Hazael and his leading men killed, he averted further attacks against Jerusalem by sending tribute to the king of Syria. And this tribute included gifts that were donated to the temple in Jerusalem by kings of Judah back in 1 Kings chapter 15 verse 15 and 1 Kings 15 verse 18. And God used Syria as an instrument of judgment against the disobedient Joash. And King Joash was wounded in the battle outside of Jerusalem, as we're going to see later this summer or fall time in 2 Chronicles chapter 24 verse 23 through 24, Lord willing. And instead of trusting God, we see that Joash traded prior blessing, the sacred treasures of the temple, to protect his capital and his kingdom against the Syrians. In verse 19 through 21, to wrap up the chapter here, it says, "Now the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And his servants arose and formed a conspiracy and killed Joash in the house of Millo, which goes down the Silla. For Zosachar, the son of Shemaeth, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servant, struck him. So he died, and they buried him with the fathers in the city of David. Then Amaziah, his son, reigned in his place." So we see in 19 through 21, Joash reign, like I said before, is more descriptive in the account given by 2 Chronicles chapters 22 through 24. And like I said, we will go through that passage, Lord willing, later this year. And some of the officials of Joash, they conspired against him because he had killed the high priest Zechariah, the son of the priest Jehoiada. And these Old Testament names, I'll tell you, I won't miss them. But, you know, Old Testament, it still matters to us because it's God's word. And the house of Millo was likely a house built on the landfill north of David's city of Jerusalem and south of the Temple's Mount. And still, Silla was likely a ramp that descended from the landfill to the Kidron Valley. What a sad ending with Joash's assassination. And so to wrap up, a few second wrap up here. There's not really much to go over with this. The chapters just spells out itself. We look today at Joash repairing the temple and the summary of the reign of King Joash. And we saw that Joash made a decree regarding the temple's repair. And we see that money was gathered for the work of this repairing. There was like a building fund collection that took place. And we saw that the temple was repaired. And we saw that Joash paid the Syrian king tribute money to avoid an attack against Jerusalem. And we see that the chapter ends with the assassination of Joash. And that's, a quick rundown of today's chapter. We'll see you again this upcoming week. And we'll be looking at the death of Elisha. So I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. God bless. We'll see you this upcoming week.